everybody, and welcome to the first seminar of the Digital Classicist seminar series in 2017. And today I have the pleasure to introduce Wolfgang Schmidle as our presenter, who is talking about chronOntology, a time gazetteer principles. And Wolfgang is working at the German Archaeological Institute since 2012 and started in the chronOntology project in 2015. Before that, he worked at for the University of Cologne and for the Max Planck Institute for the history of science. He acquired his PhD in computer science in the University of Sunderland, and before studied mathematics, information science, and German philology. So it's a very interesting mixture, and I'm looking forward to what you have to say for us today.
Hello everyone. So this is about chronOntology, the time gazetteer that will hopefully become the standard time gazetteer for all DAI projects for the temporal norm data at the DAI. So first, what is a time gazetteer? Martina already said in her introduction quite well what a gazetteer is. So you want to distinguish between Alexandria in Greece and Alexandria in wherever it was, Tajikistan. And you can do this by assigning IDs. And quite similarly, you can do this for people. You can have lists of people with IDs. And you can do the same with temporal terms, such as Augustan or Helladic, and so. And I want to go through a few time gazetteers just to give you a short impression what you can expect. So in Arachne, I hope everyone here in the room knows Arachne. Arachne has a list of temporal terms in German, like Griechisch, Römisch, and finer terms. And they come with no term definition at all. And that is actually not a bug, but a feature, because Arachne says if a researcher uses this term, then we use this term as well. And then we can have additional dating information for the item, the object that has been that is described. And Arachne will also move to chronOntology. So does it actually work? Yes, it does. So just that you see it at least once. You have Datierung here, you have a frühaugustäisch, and then some concrete time, a concrete time interval, and another dating Augustäisch. Okay, so another very important gazetteer for temporal terms is the Getty AIT. Actually, this is a thesaurus for much more than temporal terms, but it has a facet that is called styles and periods, which has more than 5,000 terms. It's linked open data. I won't go into detail what linked open data is, but I assume most of you know this as well. Basically, it means it's nicely available on the internet. It has descriptions of terms, but no real definitions. So it says, yeah, in this period something happened or so, and you think, yeah, is this defining this period, or is it just happening in this period? And it has spatial information like this style of cloth making was in 2 regions in India, but it is in a free text. It's not something that you can pick up in an automated way. And it has some inconsistencies, and it also has a small hierarchy, so whatever Augustan knows that it's the parent of Middle Augustan. Maybe just another look, just a short look. Okay, so here's the prepared look. So you have a term like Augustin with a short note describing it, different languages, and a small hierarchy. So you know that it's in Imperial, it's in Roman and in ancient Italian and so on, with a mixture of restrictions in a temporal and in a regional, in a spatial sense. All right, so another important time gazetteer is PeriodO. In PeriodO you have basically an authority, the name of the period, and a beginning and an end and a region. And this together makes up this period. So the region and the time span is part of the definition. And we will do this differently, but the reason they do it like this is that they don't say a period is a concept. We say a period is a part of the scholarly discourse, which means if a scholar says, this is what I want to talk about, then it's good enough to be included in there. And we will later see that with the same argument, some data from chronOntology could legitimately also go into PeriodO. And then on the other side, on the other side of the scale, is a kind of an ideal time gazetteer. The CIDOC CRM people have created a demonstrator how they think periods should be described. And you have definitions, or at least types, like it's defined with via the pottery style, or it's a political term. But it's only 8 terms, and it's only one source, which means they don't have the problem that they have to align information from different data sources. So on the one hand, you have a system where you can put everything in just because people want to put it in, and on the other hand you have this ideal gazetteer which is quite small, but very, very interesting. So what you see is here the 8 terms, early Minoan, so it's about the Aegean Bronze Age. And you have here a style, a type, a technology use that is the basis of the definition. You have descriptions. You can say it's part of other periods. It has parts. And it is introduced by Evans in 1921. Right, so that was a little bit about time gazetteers. Now a little bit of context about ID Welt. I assume that most of you know this, that the IT department of the DAI attempts to build a set of systems for data and for norm data and for analyzing the data, such as natural language processing and named entity recognition and so. And the portal is supposed to bring all this together in the future. So, and chronOntology is on the standards tab right next to the gazetteer. And it has a very similar function as the gazetteer, so it's part of the ID Welt. The DAI guarantees that the project will continue after it's, the funding of the DFG runs out. It's for temporal norm data of the DAI and again linked open data, which especially means that you have stable URIs, which means you can type something in the browser and it comes up. And it's supposed to be a robust system for large amounts of data and to accept different kinds of data, very, very simple data like the Arachne data, or more complex data with, for example, more than one dating opinion. And project partners are supposed to be able to enter their data in the system, large scale or small scale. And very, very important is also a minimal goal is you have some terms and you want some IDs for the terms, and we cater for that as well. So here's an image. It's a slightly outdated version. You see a mixture of German and English. This has been sorted out already in the most recent version. What you see is one term with a type, here political, the Roman Empire, and some additional information, additional names, where the term comes from. Chronontology means we have created this data set ourselves. A temporal extent and relationships to other terms. Roman alle Bedeutung, all meanings, I will come back to that. And it's split into other terms. And you see a widget for the temporal extent. It's not directly easy to see, but on top it says Roman, and you have some subdivisions of it. And below you have a geographic widget, the Roman Empire. We will hopefully at some point bring this together, time and space, in one widget. All right, so about the implementation, it has a front end, which is what you see in the browser, and it has a back end, which is where the data lives, and the front end communicates with the back end. So what you saw here in the image was the front end. It is online. You can click on this link. It's based on a JavaScript library called Angular.js. It's still in beta. We hope to have a 1.0 version soon. And you can search for terms at the top, and you can also use the widgets, the time and space widgets, for navigating through the system. And of course the relations as well. You can, for example, click on Römische Königszeit and you will come to the next data set. And it's open source, it's on GitHub. The back end is where the data lives. Again, it's linked open data. It has an API. Don't worry if you don't know what that means. It's written in Java and it has JSON as a data format. You can completely ignore this if these terms don't speak to you. So, the specific goals for this time gazetteer is to model the problems, the specific problems or challenges of temporal terms, which is, I would argue, a little more tricky than for places, especially because if you have a term like Rome, it's not clear if you mean the settlement or an administration unit, but they're all at the same place at least. Only very few cities actually move. It happens, but it's rare. We want to ingest data from all sources, electronic or otherwise. In theory, we would ingest every term that there is, but of course there are very many terms. We want to accommodate in our data model conflicting definitions and conflicting opinions. And again, it should be easy to use for minimal data sets. So the barrier of entry in our system should be low. So That means you have a list of place names and of temporal terms, and they can be imported in the system. It's only a little bit of magic involved. And of course, we want to link to other time gazetteers, as every time gazetteer on the web should. Right, so some design principles. CIDOC CRM was already mentioned. I won't go into detail here. It is a little scary with all the classes, but basically, yeah, you want to describe a world of heritage objects, of museum objects. You have a vase or this glass, which is, I have found out, quite antique, and it has a production event that was in Athens at a specific time. It has a find event that took place at some point, at some time. It has a place where it's now. It's kept in this room, curated maybe even by the kitchen personnel. So we want to be compatible as possible with CIDOC CRM, which means especially we take the term period from the CRM, which has a very, very long definition. And it says it's a set of coherent phenomena or cultural manifestations occurring in space or time. But if we, for example, want to take a term from the Getty AAT, we can assume they also mean it in this way. But sometimes it really doesn't work perfectly. A very simple example is that the definition of the period in the CIDOC CRM implies that if you take the whole time that it's going on, regardless of where. So, for example, a people can move from North America to South America, but they start moving in 300 AD and they stop moving in 500 AD. Then we are talking about this time span from 300 to 500, and this must be one interval. It's not allowed to have gaps in between. So, for example, here the Murad II was a king, and then he said, well, I don't want to be king anymore, and 1 year later he decided, yes, I want to be king again. So in a strict sense, this would be two periods, but it's not clear if it makes sense for other people to actually split it into two periods. For example, the Getty AAT doesn't. Right, and a general design principle, if we want to invent new terms like something has the core area, 2 regions in India, we introduce a new verb like has core area only if we actually have data that need this verb. Right, because it's in the title of the talk, I will have a few design principles. The first one is really, really easy and straightforward, and Martina has covered this as well. You need IDs. You have 2 different Alexandria, you need 2 different IDs. That is really straightforward. Time specific is that a temporal term cannot be defined by dating information. So we have a different approach than PeriodO, where they say, well, the region and the time is a part of the thing that I have in my system, this object of discourse. We say we have a concept and we can define a period, and then we can either know when it was, or we can not know when it was, or we can have different opinions when it was, and that's all fine. And we have at least something like types of, if we are talking about a political period or a period where that exhibits some material culture. And very important also, just as in a dictionary, if you have a term, you can look it up and you see, oh, actually, in English, whatever put or so has 10 different meanings. And time terms can also have 10 different meanings. Actually, places can also have 10 different meanings, but normally we don't care that much. And every temporal term defines a space-time volume, which means where it happened in place and time. So, for example, the Bronze Age in Germany happened in some modern regions of Germany at this time, in another region there. So this obvious fact that you cannot say it started at the same time at every place, and it didn't end at the same time at every place, but you can describe where it was. One example here is the Bronze Age in different continents, which is exactly the same as the version that I was describing for Germany and the modern Bundesländer. It might sound very small, but it also makes sense to mark if a period is actually ongoing or not. Yugoslavia, for example, is a closed thing because Yugoslavia is no more. It has ceased to be. And Germany, for example, is going on. It might become bigger, it might shrink. And this will become important at some point if we are reasoning about things. But you don't need to worry about this when you give us our data. It would be nice if you include this information, but most of the time, for most of the data that you have, the answer is no, it's not ongoing, because the people that I'm talking about are really, really long gone. A link to the gazetteer may contain additional information. I will come back to this at some use case. This is not really worked out, and I leave it out in order not to scare you too much. The data model should be robust enough to accommodate data with varying degrees of data quality and completeness. We have this. This is really, if it cannot do this, then it's not fit for the reality that it faces at the DAI. All typical statements should fit in that you find in the data. So, for example, you have 1000 BC until 800 BC, which is rough dates. It doesn't mean it really has started in 1000, but it means, if we are lucky, it's between 1100 and 900 BC. So you have some roughly before that. You have to add something like, I actually don't mean 1000, I mean roughly 1000. So very trivially, I have to have a data model where I can say roughly. And we also have a workflow where you can make data more precise or better over time. So it's easy to get the data in, but you can still work on it. And that is very important because we were working on the ingestion of the Getty AAT for a long time, and we nearly choked on that because we wanted to do it right. And this is good if you want to get a basic amount of terms into the system. So that was actually well spent time, but you cannot do this every time because then you have trouble getting more than 8 terms into the system. Right. So the data model is, you can split it up into 2 parts. So this is a black and white slide. You have to imagine that you see this Roman again with the information of provenance and names and so and relations. So just imagine there is something sparkling on bright on the slide. You have IDs and names. You have the provenance. You have types like political. And you also have a type like all meanings. That means, especially for Arachne, if we are not provided with any type, then we have to assume that all possible meanings are possible. And with Arachne, that is actually true. We would like to have definitions. Most of the times people don't have really proper definitions, so we are happy if we have types. And then standard fields like descriptions, tags, notes, and some technical information when it was created, and so on. And then you have relations between data sets. And you have basically 5 groups. So you have the sense. So if you have the Roman or Augustan in all senses, then you can relate this data set to Augustan in a political sense, or Augustan in a stylistic sense. And then you have statements about time. It follows in time after that, so Middle Augustan follows Early Augustan, or is part of. Middle Augustan is part of Augustan. Early Augustan is also part of Augustan. And you have some verbs about matching. So if every project brings their data, the very important feature of a gazetteer is to actually say, yes, different projects are talking about the same things, or at least about something very similar. And we have started with some vocabulary here. And the better the data we get, the more precise we can do the matching. So same as or finer than means basically, yeah, they are somehow the same, but we cannot really say if they're really the same or only in principle the same. And then some additional things like lists, for example, very simply because the Getty AAT says, well, we have a term European regions, and then there's a list of European regions. And of course, you cannot say is part of or so, because a specific region like Germany is not part of European regions. It's just because European regions, it's not a region. So it's only part in a list sense. It is, you have a long list and I am on this list. Is that vaguely clear? Right. It's just very simply that you have all these verbs have very precise meanings. That means is part of means I am really a period and I am part of a different period. But for example, a region like Germany is not in that sense part of a term, a concept like all European regions, because this is not a region, this is just a set of regions. Okay, so I see I lose 2/3 of this room. Let me phrase again that it is actually easy to bring data into the system, and let's just forget about this. Senses again. So one thing that a reviewer said is that if you're using terms like culture, you have to take into account that different people use the term differently, or there's a German tradition or an English tradition. So you need also a matching of these different types. And coming back to the PeriodO, PeriodO has aggregated data from many sources, like Arachne, for example, and they are being other aggregators like Europeana are aggregating PeriodO again. And so what they don't have is this all meanings thing. For example, Augustine, like the time when he started his reign and when he ended his reign. And if we have another time span for the time pieces of art in an Augustan style were produced, which is quite close to the political times, but it is not exactly the same, then you can put these times together, and this all meaning says, I can take it all. Or maybe an easier term would be Baroque, for example. You have Baroque in music, you have Baroque in architecture, you have Baroque in literature, and they are all at different times. And if you say, I mean Baroque in any possible meaning, then I can only say, yeah, it is, if I have one meaning with this time, one meaning with this time, one meaning with this time, then I mean all of them. So Baroque in all meanings is just all the times that I was talking about for the different senses. And PeriodO and Europeana would then be interested in this all meanings thing, this big time interval. So we could give our information to PeriodO if we just say, well, this is our scholarly opinion, which is an interesting twist for me. Because the different ways of seeing periods becomes quite clear here. Right, so you know that the gazetteer and Arachne somehow are also quite interrelated. If you have some place information, then the more objective part is supposed to be in the gazetteer and some additional part can be in Arachne. And there is also a split between the gazetteer and the time gazetteer. So spatial information like the Roman Empire, for example, happened on the region of the Roman Empire, is supposed to be, or we have a polygon of the Roman Empire that you also saw in this picture. This information is supposed to be in the gazetteer. And there are different ways of connecting to the gazetteer. One is, it is part of the region Roman Empire, but if you have, for example, the statement, yeah, this piece of cloth was produced in some regions, mainly produced in some regions in India, then you can only say, yeah, it's vaguely there. It's not part of it because it has been produced somewhere else as well, but mainly there. And that is the reason why we introduced core area. And then named after is like, for example, the Neanderthal is named after the Neanderthal. Of course, terms like core area are problematic because in a very hard computer sense, they don't mean much, but for most humans, they are good enough. And the circa this 1000 BC until 800 BC is again a problem for a computer, but this is what we find in the data. Time, we already had followed, is followed by, is part of. Allen relations means only I know something has happened before, I know something happened in a specific region, for example, my birth was in the 20th century, or something ended exactly in the moment something else started, or so. It's like talking about the relationships of periods of time on a timeline. And marker events are, for example, if you want to define Augustine as a political period, and you ask when did it start, and one reason is when he actually climbed on the throne, but you can also say it started in the moment when he won the battle where he defeated his enemy, because de facto then his reign started. So this is already a point where different people come to different ideas when a period starts. And the point here is that they are still talking about the same period, but they have different opinions when it ended. So another example is the Middle Ages, where you can say it's completely unclear when it ended, or there is not a fixed date. And as Francesco told me that the people in the Middle Ages would not even see a fixed date that separates them from antiquity. So, and you can have, for example, Columbus finds America, or you can have the first printed book. And so, but these are arbitrary choices. And so we can mark this, or we will be able to mark these things in our system. And different dating systems in the Aegean Bronze Age means that you can argue with the destruction of a palace or with other ways of dating your periods there. Okay, I won't go into detail here. It's just one use case to try to understand the system better. We have terms like in the DAI thesaurus, like Hochmittelalter, which already have some temporal information in them, some arbitrary information. And then you have things like Arabische Münzen. Is this a temporal term at all? Barbarische Nachprägungen. It's a tricky thing. And how to match them with other terms. Can you match this with Arabic? Or we are working on this. Right. The data so far. Maybe we should have a look at the data at this moment, so that you die of boredom in the middle of the talk. So you can click on the provenance, and then you will get a widget with all terms with the same provenance. You can click through to its parts, like Römische Königszeit, and additional parts like Tarquinian, and so on. At the moment, don't mind the Beschreibung, the description part. This is sometimes taken from Wikipedia, and we're not sure if this is a valid source. And we might leave it out at some point, but so you can just imagine it's not there, but sometimes it helps to have it there. Especially if you... So a normal thing with gazetteers is that you have 3 different Romes and you think, what do I mean? Or 3 different Alexandrias, what do I mean? So even if it's Wikipedia, sometimes it helps to know that, yes, this is actually what I mean. And it's enough to find this out, and then you forget that you have read Wikipedia. And so the biggest part is the Getty AAT. I've talked about this. And Arachne, this list with no temporal information. We have also played with some geological epochs, and a little bit like Pleistocene, and so especially as a stress test for the time widget, because these geological epochs tend to start quite early in the history of time. And secondary literature, Natalie Callas has... who sits in the back, has worked on the Bronze Age in the Levant, and she has started with these terms. And then you have a chronOntology core, where I will not go into detail at the moment, and I am not in the right mode, sorry. The ingestion workflow means basically, again, give me your data, give me your Pompeii data, I am waiting for it. And then we will sort this out. At the beginning it will be difficult, but more difficult than later on, but in the beginning you will have also more help than later on. And then it will become better over time, or we can find out how you put this in our system so that nothing explicitly wrong is stated, but only things that are somehow vague. Vague is better than wrong. And here's one example that we played with. So with the first terms, we try to do things explicitly. You have Hadrianic in all senses, like, for example, from Arachne. And then if we add additional information that is not in the original source, then we create a new ID. And then we can have, for example, a new name, or we can have a specialization from all senses to political or to cultural. And all these things have different IDs, and you can link to them, you can cite them. And the question is that we need to work out in the next 2 months before the IT Tage, because there will be a hands-on session at the IT Tage, and you will be hopefully able to put your data in the system, at best even live. We need to find out what we want to have at the very least, and that's difficult to say. So, for example, in PeriodO you need a place and a time, because in PeriodO it doesn't make sense to include anything that doesn't have a region and a time. For us it's not that strict, because we can say, well, we have the reign of a specific emperor, Murad II, even though we don't know where his kingdom was or when it was. We only read the sentence that in between for 1 year he didn't rule because he didn't want to. That would be good enough in our system. But of course, place and time are always great, because then you have these nice widgets that you can click on and see on the map. And so the data without place and time becomes as dry as a black and white slide. So give us places, give us times. And provenance is just the name of your project. Yes, we have some challenges that you are probably all know about, because many of you are archaeologists anyway. So, for example, if you take the Bronze Age, the original 19th century definition, and say, take this definition and apply it to the Levant, then the researchers that are working in this area will say, yeah, but no, but yeah, but we actually define it differently, even though we call it still Bronze Age. So you need to keep these things apart. And one thing, for example, about Augustine is that when a Greek area, a Greek region is annexed by the Romans, and they're producing now Augustine-style pieces of art, is this actually the right thing to say, or is it still a Greek style? And our system is not about answering this question. Our system is supposed to help formulate these questions in a computer way. Right, and reasoning is... So you already had pairs of things. So, for example, if Middle Augustan is part of Augustan, then Augustan has the part Middle Augustan, so you can go it in both directions, quite obviously. If the Roman Empire has a region, then anything that is a temporal part of the Roman Empire, for example, the reign of a specific emperor, then this happened in the same region, for example. And what you could see if you did pay attention, which of course you all did, was the Roman Empire had a region, and if you clicked on some, for example, the early kingdom, then this region disappeared, because the system doesn't know yet that a subterm could inherit the region of the Roman Empire. So the system is still a little stupid. And then is part of, in a definition sense, so Middle Augustan is defined as a part of Augustan, then it is also in a very simple temporal term part. So, for example, my birth in the 20th century, the 20th century doesn't really care if I was born there or not. It's still, my birth is part of it, but the 20th century would have happily lived on until the end of it without this birth event. And Middle Augustan is different. It is actually, by definition, part of Augustan, but you can infer it's also in a sheer temporal sense part of Augustan. This is again something, if it is scary, then ignore it. We take your data without you knowing what is done with it then in the reasoning steps. So, a few more images at last. What you can see here is an experiment with Arachne where you have different terms assigned to objects, and then you can see where these objects are actually located. So what you have is a de facto area for different terms over time, and it changes. And this can be because there were actually no finds, there were no people who produced something, or it was just that it is because in Arachne the data is not there, because no one bothered to fill in any Eastern European Mesolithic objects in Arachne. And the next project might change this, and then the map looks different. Again, for a different system, you can have Imperialis here, which is a place gazetteer. You can see where the things are that are connected with the term Roman. And most of it is not very surprising. Maybe it's interesting that it goes up to the very north of the British Isle and to the south of India, but most of it, of course, is not surprising. And also something like if you don't want to search for a specific term, but you want to search for everything that is of interest to you in a specific region, then we are working on a widget that allows this as well. Can you actually read this? So in the middle you see the one thing with the most connections is Augustine, and it's just something that I have said at a few places already. You have Augustine in the political sense, in the cultural sense. You have these marker events like 30 BC or 27 BC, and you also have one at 31 BC, I think. The battle that Augustus won. This is the possible ways of defining the beginning of the political era, and then this is about describing the fact that in Asia Minor you can say that a style is now Augustan, or you can say, well, actually it's still a Greek style. So you have here Augustan in a material culture sense, and you have a stricter definition or a looser definition, and so this is actually a way of understanding how we can use the gazetteer for temporal terms. And this is another work for me to put this into some best practices where you then can find out how to put the data in your system, just as we have best practices for the gazetteer, which are also supposed to guide you in the right direction without making it too difficult to enter your data. And then another example that is about the interplay of different systems. So you have IDI field, which will soon be IDI field 2, which will no longer be FileMaker but a proper web application. And then you have, it's very small, I see. So you have an excavation in Helgö in Sweden, and at some part of the excavation you find a Buddha statue next to other strange objects that some Vikings have put together in one grave, and you can wonder, how did this happen, and did the Vikings have actual contact with northern India? And probably not, so probably this Viking statue traveled in a few steps. But what you can say is that very trivially, in a way, that the extent in time and space where these Buddha statues reached intersects with the Viking period. And a proof, a witness is this Buddha statue. And so this is somehow a formalization of something that is probably in a way obvious, but these formalizations sometimes help to put these pieces of information into a computer. Because, well, you have a system, you have your data, and so it's just like having a pile of CDs and you want to have them in the cloud. Actually, you have to put the CDs in a CD drive. You cannot just say, now, go in the cloud. So sometimes you need to understand how the formalism works. Named entities is something that we may work on, but I have no real idea how at the moment. Martina was describing this already in her description at the beginning. This would introduce non-modern terms. So again, if you have paid attention, then you have seen that we only have modern scholarly terms. With Augustine, you can say that even at that time it was clear that Augustus changed things so radically, such a short time, that you can already say that this is something that people recognized at the time. But we are using Augustine in a modern term, and here we would use Augustine. We would take the terms that are actually in the literature, how ancient authors, for example, use them. And then this is a point where I can come back to this principle that a link to the time gazetteer may contain additional information. You can say, for example, we are talking about the present, we are talking about the time when the author wrote the book, we are talking about the time that the author is talking about. And then, as I said, in 2 months we have the IT Tage with a hands-on session, and until then, we have talked about this. We need a more neutral URL. So at the moment, we have chronOntology.dainst.org, and we want to get people from non-DAI projects to put their data in there, and we don't want to imply with this dainst.org that it's actually the DAI that is stealing your data. So maybe we will call it just chronOntology.org. And we want to reach the 1.0 version where you can put your data in and it's not lost in the next week, but it will actually be there 1 year later, or maybe even 2 or 5 years later. And best practices and how the system works in more detail. And that's it. Thank you.